Chanju Badu Dani Jasu She Dagi Chijin Jivesan Chala Benji Sanje Druba Sho Sanje Chetan Soje Chan Chanju Badu Dani Jasu She Dagi Chijin Jivesan Chala Benji Sanje Druba Sho Sanje Chetan Soje Chan Dani Jasu Che Dagi Jesu Jive Sana Luwa Jo Ladan Lami Medamya Jion Boda Chechen Lasu Che Chala Chava Chava Sanje Subara Dushi Dive Juru Juba Tata Che Tempe Chinye Dini Dire Che Jire Deve Chechen Dere Che Savete Tenji Cheva Tela Chodu Techen Kuwa Yi Deve La Penye Jesu Jesu Seme Ambe Dani Leva Tula Tuve Sonya Jian Namo Lavi Karan Tanda Jinga Tuputa Tami Kano Chowa Kunji Dra Nama Je Zaba Tanja Karu Tak Je Den Do Kanga Jeta Jiva Da Tsudi Yini Panju Va Tenjen Jewa Che Soye Tuan De La Cha Cha Lo O La Sa Da Ka Sore Tigina Chidu Jebe Tsongana La 아니 시비송을 제제지 제제베 남니 계랑 애대자 천이진이 아니 두차데 지시시비 된자인 제데 어다 수만나시 전에 라 시바 코와기 아니 송우데 아니 동아 줘봐 잡아게 아니 라면 가래래 세나다 잠을 오 가르소래 탑지 캐바라 야춘비 심바 탑지 심베기 아니 삼일 남지 좀 봤대 아니 내 제가 땜바사기 시비송어 제제베 아니 남는 캐랑 나이den차 춘이진이 루자친 시저 오다 땜바나시 아니 오 가소래 텐더비 아니 타바타 탐제 쳔번 루바 려바기 아니 단도지 나죠와 되게 아니 람데 아니 루고 그래 신이진이 루바자 오 텐더비 잠못 톰tom바니 아니 덤바 제바데 티시시위 덤 아니 티시 좀 전에 홍보도 상전에 아니 제배 쪼데 아니 semjen 남지 시비송우 줘봐 세배 탑송해야 돼. 단 티시시와 그 잡아들이 티시시배 된자인
So yes, now what should be said here? There's a verse from the Udana Varga, which the collection of advice, and in that it says that the teaching of the Buddha is designed solely in order to remove the pain from sentient beings, from the suffering of sentient beings, and the initial part of the verse shows the way in which one needs to develop the understanding of emptiness, that is the teaching on reality, which here refers to the understanding of emptiness. And then when that understanding of emptiness is conjoined with the method portion of the path, the cultivation of the merits of that are derived from the practice of generosity and so forth, then that serves as the method by which one can achieve liberation. Or in addition, on top of liberation, then of course, if one does this in the Mahayana fashion, then one can achieve also the perfect omniscience of Buddhahood. And so the conclusion of this verse, I said it was from the Udana Varga, I'm not sure about that. Chetu Jupe Tsom. Is that Udana Varga maybe? I'm not sure the title of the text there. In Tibetan it's Chetu Jupe Tsom. And I think that maybe is Udana Varga, but I'm not sure. So anyway, the end of that verse says that this is that whatever the Buddha does, all of the activities of the Buddhas are designed strictly for the purpose of alleviating the pain the sentient beings. And so if someone wishes to accomplish that, the yogi or yogini who wishes to accomplish that needs to first understand the teaching on emptiness, and then employ the methods that are conjoined with the understanding of emptiness in order to become someone who is able to alleviate the sufferings of sentient beings.
Oh yeah, that tender is Samuel Jimba Debbie, and it then you see your day, and it's Chaba la. Oh yeah, like a Sunday, you go low and you were too much at you, Cabatella. And it's Silcabatan, Silcaba said the council, Silcabata, Nanga Cherato Caba, Benani. That do much Zayo Cabatella. 你们这有感觉的了，看了说那大伙些，说给我他给到，看完那么就抬到了几点半就推不动，晒的在地上把它，然后光是你们前头送上的那个他呢搞不当，抬了那个没这包我，是呢，他最后那个送完那些，你们前头了送不下呢，那个当，俺那说当过当。 안에 소소 담면 주고 봐. 제가 손 쇼고 와인자. 다디 손고 와래. 시험에 던져라. 난가탕. 안에 소소 땅고 와된당. 接了大多可以把国线说说大明白噻，这个接完了，单独开起来，国线说说大明就过把汤。安尼他，你们这债主得把印章，大债数，大债数也把顺便讲了，那开两边讲了，开两边那都行了，是呀，明的是的呢。我的拖债技术搞不怎么了，那个他家大娃说句他妈多娃是，他的就不给其他毛病那个了。 俺这看是，两个可是首先没去把那快吃吧，咱那个下个月我一张，那个现在的俺这托别人家干什么的，没干起来那个下个月我的一张，拖这技术搞不咱那个，他家大我说去太麻多吧。 你们最近那个了说完，我那大我写，每个月说给我他个多把切记，谁干了？看了说完，大我写说给我他个多是我有天看到你来开完那么的，俺这听到了。 团主把大完，团的把主把大小，再是主把团的把主把大小，几点被他也被产品下去团怎么样？俺那大表我嘛懂的，是一张开完那么就太大了，几点被叫团我嘛懂，所以大把再是要把去嘛懂的，是他也被产品下呀。
So here then, so in order to explain the profound reality, the profound emptiness, then that which is necessary in order to achieve liberation or omniscience, the omniscience of Buddhahood, to remove the sufferings of other sentient beings, one's own sufferings or the sufferings of sentient beings, then this treatise expounds the profound teaching on the profound aspect of the path, especially teaching of emptiness, and that leads into this next topic here within the ninth chapter, ninth exposition. We're in verse 205, where there's a refutation that the idea of the three uncreated things are, or uncompounded, sometimes it's translated, or unproduced things. I'm translating these dumache as uncreated and duce as created things. Those three are substantially existent. First comes a general refutation of that, and then a refutation in particular that space is a permanent, pervasive thing. So first comes the general rejection or refutation of the idea that the three types of uncreated things are substantially existent, and that's given in verse 205, where it says that space, that ordinary beings think or imagine that space, etc., are permanent, but those who are wise or educated in this, they understand that they don't see this in the same way that these things are seen by worldly knowledge. And so here the commentary on this explains that the treatises on metaphysics explain, here this refers to the Abhidharma texts, Abhidharma Shastra or Abhidharma treatises, the explanations of metaphysics, that the space, and then there are two other kinds of negations or cessations here. The first one is called that which is ceased through knowledge, and then the other one is things which are ceased or negated not as the result of some knowledge of them. They're sosodakok and sosodakmayimpe gokpa in Tibetan. Those two kinds of negations. The first one is, for example, cessation that's achieved through knowledge of the Four Noble Truths, and the second one would be an example of that would be a cessation or something that doesn't arise because the causes that are necessary for it to occur are incomplete. So in some Abhidharma treatises, then treatises on metaphysics, these things are held to be permanent, and permanent in the sense of being substantially existent. They're taught that, and if one rejects that, then one has contradicted that which is held here. So this is basically someone like a Vaibhashika, follower of the Vaibhashika school of Buddhist philosophy, is positing that the three kinds of uncreated things are substantially existent and permanent. And so here, if the idea that these things are substantially existent and permanent is rejected, then that contradicts some positions that are held by Buddhists in general. But the reply to that is no, that's not the case. Here, the person who's holding that is not understanding that the mere negation of physical things which are obstructive is given the designation or is designated by the convention space. Here, designated by means of the convention space. So not understanding that, they think that space, which is an uncreated thing, and other things like that, they imagine that these things are permanent things, and so that's something that ordinary people who are uneducated imagine it in that way. But those who are skilled or educated in the reality of things, they understand that those things are not ultimately existent. Here, ultimately existent, ultimately established could be read as meaning substantially existent or substantially established as substances, but they don't accept that. What needs to be, and they don't hold that in any way, for whatever. But then these educated or wise people would also say that even from the worldly perspective, and such, even within that, simply as being objects which are ascertained by conventional valid cognition, that these things, a permanent thing is never observed.
Oh yeah, so tango that kasore so tayo kwabane chawa so yi se kana yemo pache melang ge toji ane pangja kasare tetan chawi ane chaja so yuwa ina pangja ge changdang ya ba ge chaja so yuwa inza ane te so大有国吧，你朝说一说当我的了挂电是个他挂电，又拍起来了的是吧？那的单面就国吧现在呢，给了大多开始把高线说单面吧，谁干了？给马上为这些，俺这是马几把的了，俺这说单面就国吧是。
So these two kinds of negations, apart from space, or these space is one type of uncreated thing, and then there are two other kinds of categories of uncreated things. The first is called specifically, or cease through knowledge is a kind of general rough translation of that, but specifically cease through knowledge is a more full translation of that, because here this is referring to things which are negated or ceased during the path of from the path of seeing onwards. That is, there are multiple levels of the mental afflictions and their propensities that are individually specifically negated through specific knowledge of the four noble truths and so forth. So these things are each of these obstacles to the achievement of nirvana is specifically individually negated through specific knowledge that that eliminates and causes them to cease. So each of them has each of them, when they're ceased, has what is called I don't know how to translate that term. Dralchasana. Dralcha. Yeah. What it means is it's a technical term, meaning like in the Vaibhashika system, all of these things are considered to be sort of like real or substantially existent from the Prasangika point of view, at least. And then so it's like the separation from that obstacle is something which is held to be real or substantially existent, even though it's just a negation. So that's the first type of these things cease through knowledge. And then the other kind, which are of negations or cessations, are things which are not ceased through knowledge, are things like the non-arising of a result, such as a sprout, for example, through the lack of the complete complex of the causes and conditions that would give rise to it. So the non-arising of that sprout is a kind of negation. It's an absence of the sprout, and that is in the Vaibhashika system considered to be a real thing, and so here that's being rejected as well.
Oh yeah. Tanglo mato me che siendo juwa me ba ta ba tawa yinji ta ba se wa ne ani siendo juwa ma che na ge je ma ma yin bi xin de ba ta bi chen song na xi chen ni ra siendo juwa ma ge je ma yin na juwa yo go wa yin zang ani siendo juwa me ba ta ba tawa yinji ani kwa so de rupa zuo xie wa de ma ma yin se ani de ka zhe ran ge kwa sa su xian xian jun wa la ani ka sa de kwa che ba xian mi jun wa de de ma de se ro rupa zuo wa de ma ne me no se.
So then here we designate something as being permanent merely because of its lack of changing into something else. That's what we designate as with the term, by the convention, permanent. But in the sutra, this is not principally taught as something which is positively established. And here the instance of space. Space is the mere absence of some kind of obstruction, physical obstruction, and so here that's not being taught in the sense of something that's positively established, which a permanent thing would have to be.
아니 다 가서 다니와 다접 제라도 가봐라. 초시 차와 초전이 꿀나와 마인디 대지 초전 라초니 아니想做的进度少月是那나가니 따바인디 아니 초탐자라 차위세 감미다 버티니 아니 초탐자라 차와 메디 배나 pom바시 셴나是的话难怪的탐자라 차와 초탐자라 차와 인자 따바레 강 미다 버티니 아니 초탐자라 차와 마이디 미다마디 배나 pom바시 셴나 차와 가비거나 따바 가바니 나가 초탐자라 차와다 참여도开봐 가와상 초탐자라 차와다 나가 참여도开봐 가와타 우리 세지 분발아 요위 나기 초 세자와데 아니 초전 나가 가집지 분발아서 그냥 차 말해서 다 자주지 분발아 차비 초대 분비 나게 나가데 노제지 분발아 맞아 누조지 분배 난게 난가데 샤조지 분발라 맞아봐서데 어디지 난가니 가잡지 돼지 분발라서 꿀라나와 마인데 대단하 셀지 분발이 난게 범난게 난가데 누조기 범난라니 찹사와이나 아니 샤누고 범반이야 지도 차타와 그简单 거 알다 是吧 대단한 누지 범바 샤는 나와타 셀지 범바 안에 누면 나와서 안에 샤누지 그 범반이야 지도 타와 그 안에 简单 거 알다
So then the next verse is showing that a specific rejection of the idea that space is a permanent, pervasive thing. And here this is given in verse 206. And where does this have? So here the assertion is given that space is permanent because it is omnipresent, or it's all-pervasive is another way to translate that. It pervades everything. Whatever is impermanent like a pot is not omnipresent or all-pervasive. The reply to that is the following rejects permanence by refuting omnipresence or all-pervasiveness. It is contradictory to assert that space is all-pervasive or omnipresent but partless at the same time. And then the verse is given here saying a single direction is not present. Ruth is translated as direction. One could also equally translate that as region. Region here, direction, the term chok or pradesha, is not present. I'm going to just follow her translation for this. Single direction is not present wherever there is that which has directions. That with directions, therefore, clearly also has other directional parts. The part of space contiguous to an eastern pot is not present wherever there is space which has directions, such as where there is a western pot. If it were, the western pot would be in the east and the eastern pot in the west. So this is showing that space can't be all-pervasive in the sense of being part and also being partless at the same time and permanent in that way. That wouldn't work. Because space, there are instances of it or particular regions of space in the west, space in the east. Space has regions, portions of it.
대도도와 초시 자와 초전의 그런나와 마인데 세대 세지 분발한 조회 난기 초시 자와 차차와 그 난기 초샤와 초전 난간이 된다위지 난가데 가잡지 돼지 분바소라 그런나와 말에 세대 그런나와 마인데 나 가소래 그런나와 마인데 되나 아니 샤누지 분바 다시 시원하시 대단한 누지 분바 샤는 나와다 샤지 분바 샤누지 타와서 교와 인장 아니 다 가르소래 참여도 더바치단 가그래서 내가 대답 방원 되네 샤를 채외 난기 차 누라 미나와 카레나니세 샤조기 분바라 채외 난기 차대 누지 아니 누저기 분바라 아니 마자오 미나와 카레나 되나니 다들 시원하네. 초전 나가라 초대 차선이 현양 시도 초전 나가라 초대 차선이 현양 시도 무슨 참아대送라 근데 말해 저 죽음제 차시 나 조전 나가라 초대 차선이 현양 시도 사야 요거에 아니 다제 경우 사와开랑바 미쳐고 야
So thus, again, the part of this space that is contiguous to an eastern pot is not present wherever there is space, which has directions or regions to it, such as where there is a western pot. If that were the case, if it were the case, then if it were the case that the space was completely homogeneous without any regions to it or any directions to it, then the western pot would end up in the east and the eastern pot in the west. Then to guard against this such a fallacy, one asserts that the part of space which is in the east is not in the west, then directional space clearly must have other parts, must must be divided up into different parts. And therefore, one should not accept permanent things, permanent functional things, she says here. The word thing I have to qualify that here. I'm going about the translation here. The word thing is used in two senses. Sometimes it's used strictly for created things or functional things. Sometimes it's used to include both functional things and non-functional or uncreated things like space. So here she's taking it as referring to a functional thing, but I'm not sure that's exactly right. Here, permanent thing in any case in general.
哦呀，多了有时候大结完呢，他就我是的，是吧？没大结完呢，他你我是一个人，他打打，看说的，打把打把当，啊你两把没大别两把打把你我的他你我，写书说，印章国电当个是对，那才能两把当个是对国外印章。 如的了，国电承担点把这个外印章，承担点把当个是对吧？你确定了，切入的就我是。
So then there's a sutra passage which is the evidence for the position that is being held here, the rejection of this thing being a permanent thing, it being permanent and a real thing in the way that it's held by the Vaibhashikas, etc. And it says, here sutra says, O Kashyapa, permanence is one extreme, so-called, and impermanence is the other extreme. So the belief that ultimate reality, things that are ultimate realities are permanent functional phenomena is real functional things is outside of this teaching, foreign to this teaching, outside of Buddhism.
Oh yeah, that is that's what three taba kabatela, three taba kabatela, subject nga yubi nane. 他不觉大把就开了呢，这不看样开了吧？天是他觉得大把啊，你就是开了呢，觉大把就开了呢，这不看样，这不样开两个万年。康熙元呢，我把那就当多把样没把住。 这些现在网友在谈那这部养猪肉，是他这个话说的，这些商网，猪肉话这些商网个个，你他出的嘛话的，最大把的送过是吧？这些商业他嘛完了说完哪里也是，最大把康熙元呐是，最大把康熙元呐，如果来说我把那最高些个菜究竟这话没把当。 今现在讲归了说话，说你归你退了说一次，老把也没把绝，你退也把接受帮你了是啊，老把就没白是干了，康熙元呢我把了，就当我也没把退入，是的，没是这样啊，退了退了退上退了没对吧？大把人了先呐是哦。
So next comes a rejection of the idea that time is a permanent thing, time is a eternal or permanent thing. Here, first there's a show that it's a demonstration that it's necessary to accept that time, if time was permanent and one holds that it has a cause, then one also would have to accept that it's an effect, and that's not viable. And so then the reason for that, and then showing that this time being permanent would something being permanent would contradict things transforming into other things, and then there's a demonstration that it contradicts that something arising from itself contradicts it being contingent upon a cause, and then finally the fifth subject here is showing that something being originated from something that is permanent or eternal would contradict it being impermanent. But first comes showing that it's necessary if you hold that permanent time functions as a cause, then one also would have to hold the same thing with respect to the result of it. And this is given in verse 207. And here the opponent is a follower of the Vedanta, and so here it says the Vedantins, followers of the Vedanta and others would say, since time exists, functional things are seen to start and stop. But and then the answer to that is time is governed by other factors, thus it is also an effect in the second half of the verse. But here then the opponent is saying, since permanent time exists, the beginning and growth of things like a sprout are seen, while in winter and so forth, although other conditions are present, this is seen to stop. One can thereby infer the existence of time, which moreover is permanent because it doesn't depend upon a cause. That's the position of the Vedantikas, is the way it's given here, or Vedantins.
Oh yeah, that didn't. That two taba la kena, kaso two la medeva taba in sena. Ona yugu la sawa chechen. Miji we two ta to mebata, two ta to jevisin, two ta to miji we two meba, two ta to jevata, two taba la jevisin. Two taba la tena jude miji beranse in two kanto yang, ane juyo yenza, ane teletebu yugu joko yenza, two taba la jevisin. 가데 아니 그 가서 누구 때와대 제샤라 되세나 제샤라 되세나 뒤에 대부치다 뒤에 다바만이 보다 아니 뒤에 대부치디 좋았다 세더라 뒤에 현재 왕주 뒤에서도 오도마 용거도 대부 뒤에 대부치디 좋았다 누구데 랑가게 봐 제현재 왕도 출 그때 최신의 소비 변화 개와 테니치로지 우주신의 변화 개와 예상이 되니 되니 현재 왕조 되니 테나 대부야 주로 써야 되나 랑가 개와 주신의 왕도 주대 최신의 개와 개 아니 최신의 소비 최신의 소비 최다신의 소비 개나 대바 테니치
So then the reply to that, so they might say, the reply to that would be, then it follows that sprouts, etc., are constantly produced. They'd be arising all the time, and there would never be a time when they're not produced. Sprouts and other things that are produced from causes and conditions would never occur at some times and not occur at others, because they would be produced from a permanent cause. Without the causes, it would be constantly, a complete complex of the causes and conditions that give rise to the thing would be there at all times without any alteration. They're all constantly present, and therefore the effect, the sprout and so forth, would be arising at all the time. And so then the reply to that would be that the Vedantins would say their production depends on other factors, and then the response to that we would say that if it is governed by other factors, thus it is also an effect. That is, time would be contingent upon these other factors for it to be able to produce the results that it supposedly produces. And so then the commentary here says, then it follows that time too is an effect, for the intermittent production of sprouts is governed by other factors, being dependent on conditions, contingent upon conditions like heat and moisture. So it's not that time then would be able to constantly function as a cause, because then time itself is something that would be contingent upon these other external factors of heat and moisture and so forth, things other than time, to be able to have the ability to produce the effect that is supposedly produced by it. And so that's the reply to that.
Oh yeah. You can't say. Two never can buy a money days. There you to the moment that I did not. Serangama, I'm Davy. You can't say. You send them, you land them, you go again, Chimisa. So she do the Papa, not the one you remember so. Say, Gana. And oh, Serangama. kawa jayu ondu sa kagi ani kawa da miki wilanam kawa jason le de sa ne kawa jason na le de gewe le yina gewe le de ani khondu jomba ta ani miki wile yina nyambo toshi shaba chaba de mayin bagi ani tenda wi gewe le de gewe ji le de sa ne kawa jason na yang le de na mi de wo chi mi sa wa de wo ji bi tu la ba ba na ani gewe le ji de bu de wa da mi ge wile ji de bu dong an ni de me ba ju re以前那么一年那么高我讲呀去没啥，说起退了白吧，那这我你都没把就是哦。
Then however, it's not the case that we don't accept time, that time is non-existent. We accept that there is past, there's present, there's future, that time does exist. So we reject this notion of time as it's posited by this other school, but we nevertheless accept the existence of time, past, present, and future. And so a verse here which illustrates that is that here it says that the karma of embodied beings for hundreds of eons is not lost. Here we have to qualify that. In general, one has to say that embodied beings or sentient beings, their karma, when they create virtuous karma, the effect of that eventually will occur unless there's some intervening factor like anger. If one has extreme anger, then that can destroy the effect of some virtuous karma, even a powerful virtuous karma that one has produced. Then that can basically remove the ability of that karma to produce the result that it would normally produce. And then likewise on the virtuous, on the other side, even a heavy non-virtuous karma that one creates, non-meritorious karma like killing or even worse sorts of things, those things also are not inevitably going to produce their results. In the general sense, we have to say that yes, if you do something extremely non-virtuous like that, it's going to produce a heavy negative result eventually. But even a heavy negative karma like that, there are factors like confession, if one properly confesses it and purifies it through the four opponent powers and does other practices to diminish the effects of it and remove them, there's no even non-virtuous karma that cannot be, the effect of which cannot be avoided. So, and that has to be qualified. But in a general sense, the karma of embodied beings will never be lost, even for hundreds of eons. When all of the causes and conditions are assembled and the time arrives, the time, here it says the time occurs when all of the assemblage of the causes and conditions is present, then the result will occur, will manifest.
Oh yeah, that is it. You are teaching them is at the center. Teaching them is you can call it as an Debu Meba Julani, Juni Yoba Maindi. Teaching and Junam Gui, Debu need to tower Juru, Sikara. That two, Jur Kalam, my way, two Jur my way, two Jur Kalena, and the Debu and two Debu are Kalan Gure. Gigi Debu, Rank Gigi Debu Meba Ni Sikala. Do Meba Julani said, Rank Gigi Debu Meba Julani, you need to judge about my day. Rank Gigi Debu Meba and a Julai, doing Baki and Gunzam judge about my days. Do job at the Rank Deula Doris. Do job at the Rank Deula Doris. Teachina, Junzan teaching, do job at the wood on a door, Junzan teaching, Junam going to win to a tower jewel. I need the woman by a Jukala Mishaw.
So the next point is the reason for that, the explanation that's just been given in the previous verse, the evidence for that or reasons for that, is that if proponents of time as a cause accept the people who say that time is a cause of events occurring accept it as a cause, then they should also accept it as an effect. And the reason is given in the verse, 208. Any cause without an effect has no existence as a cause. Therefore, it follows that causes must be effects. Without the effect it produces, a cause lacks that which establishes it as a cause. For the establishment of a cause depends on its effect. To establish that something is a cause, it necessarily is contingent upon there being an effect to establish it as a cause. Thus, since it follows that all causes must be effects, one should not accept causes that lack effects. Anything accepted as a cause should be accepted as facilitating an effect.
Oh yeah, sorry. 대부 줄에 되어와대 아니 지금도 엄마가 되어왔어. 제 줄에 때에 다요 공화마군 되면장스. 대부 대신 대부 되어와야 단주 도와만이 변발해. 좋아. 주 생각 잡아대 저로 되는 잡아마도 저만에 주셔서 매봐이다. 줄에 대부에 받아 주셔 거야. 일본에 때때 통을 셔 거야. 我咱俩点的年小鬼，他都是这个，对这对这个啥呀？这个，我对这，
So this explanation of the way of causality, the relationship between causes and effects, asserting that effects necessarily are contingent. I'm sorry, that causes are contingent upon their effects to be causes. That's specific to this system that is being taught here. In the lower schools of Buddhist philosophy and other non-Buddhist schools of philosophy, this model of showing the interdependence of cause and effect in that way, the contingency of causes upon effects, is not held in the same way. And the same thing applies to all other relations between things, causal relations as well as identity relations, or the contingency of them as it's expressed here is not held in common with the other schools of Buddhist philosophy, and particularly with respect to causality. Generally, Buddhists would say, in general, Buddhists would say that effects are contingent upon causes, but they're not. Non-prasangika philosophers are not able to establish likewise the contingency of causes upon effects. That mutual relationship isn't. They can't establish it.
Oh yeah, that did it. That's what. 先都就我大把搞把你，先都就我大把搞把你是，先都就我大把搞把你，原来那把就完了。 先去就是做的，看了那么就有了，天天大家才有面子。但是我看他看一那，就看他看一那，就是开了那，你判多少钱，这屋里判多少都开了，我这是判多少句子，但才你说个我说，就是开了那这屋里判多少的开了的，随便了稍微就你，我来你说那么多啊。 我来，你说那么久啊？你过来说话，先去就去啊，对，对，原来那么久啊，那先去就去啊，对，是的哦，先去就去啊，对，我看了样，这些我去明着我那么久啊，是个，但高兴俺们起码跟我啊对的，那么久啊，要把天呢。 아니 미다바를 마도大体小也把明白，这个各级多种个的미다바 쓰个玩意儿，大体小也把明白，看了那么就是把天天大体小也明，除了说大把那把他们都就那把他们都就开两把没下过，呀，
Next comes showing how it's contradictory for something to transform into something else and at the same time be permanent. That's the two are contradictory, and that's given in verse 209, which is here the introduction to that is anything accepted as a cause should be accepted as facilitating an effect. If one accepts something as a cause, then one necessarily has to accept it as being something that facilitates facilitates the arising of an effect. And so the verse here, 209 says, when a cause undergoes change, it becomes the cause of something else. Anything that undergoes change becomes other than itself, changes into something other than itself, should not be called permanent. A cause such as a seed acts as the cause of something else, such as a sprout. Through a change from its prior state, from before, it says here, from a prior state in its potency or its ability to produce the effect, there's a modification of the force within the cause, which it enables it to function as that which facilitates or activates the effect, causes the effect to come into existence. So any functional thing which changes so that its former and latter moments are unalike should not be called permanent. So anything at all which is momentary, that is a former moment of it is different from a subsequent moment of it, cannot be called permanent. Is inappropriate to call that permanent. Thus, one should not accept or assert that there's a permanent time. There's no such thing as permanent time, and so forth, that these things should be construed as being causes.
Oh yeah, that's it. Dale jiwa jule dewa kawa ni sirang la jiwa. Daba jikanga ju yinbi ngoy de ma chung wa la ji. Rani chung wa chu te la, juni loba chu wa de shi. Jide ani tui jang ani juwa ke mele na, juwa yoba ke mele na, tui jang juwa ke mele na, ani juwa mi bi tui, daba ani nyugu la sowa kanga ju yinbi. 아니 누구라서 와칸게 주인비 아니 누구 오테세 어디에 따박한게 주인비 아니 누구 따박한게 주인비 뭐에 테마 뭐에 마중 내지지 어디 된다위 따박 가서래 누구라서 와랑게 주인비 누구 오버테 마중이 줄에 깨베세 오버테 마중이 줄에 깨베 라완도 깨베 아니 누구들 라완도 중화 타로스 라니 라완도 주와 테라 제지디 주니요 라완도 중화 테라 테라 제지지 거 주거야 말이 아니 테라네 제지 그 주네 로버 주와데 아니 라완도 중화데 줄에 때와데 메테베처럼.
The next point is showing that it's contradictory for something that arises from itself to be contingent upon a cause. And here, someone might say, in the verse, I'll just read the verse. A thing with a permanent cause is produced by that which has not come into being. Whatever happens by itself cannot have a cause. If one does not accept that time also too changes, it follows that a functional thing such as a sprout, whose cause is unchanging permanent time, has come about of its own accord from itself, because of being produced by a cause that has not come into being. Whatever happens by itself cannot have a producing cause, because its contingency or dependence here, contingency on a cause, is inadmissible. So that's incoherent.
Oh yeah, that's what it is. Loba juwa de che. Do mi de bishir. Da taba la jewa mi da ba gawa ni. Yu taba la jewa ani de u mi da ba gawa. Ngo taba la jewa, ngo taba le je ba ji da bu na mi da churu. 남양 주단 제부니 책임이 토마 yin. 단 누구라서 온 최전 치다보 미다바 주디 미주바타 미다바 주디 아니 미다바 미주바타 아니 주다바라 지 사바라 지 我大把来解吧乔有啊他举那么举dan这部你这大了继续没到被参与没得把没到没事谁个呢记得不能没到就是那样举dan这部你参与没得痛嘛因谁的我的他举那么举dan这部你我的这大了就是没到把的你没得把个参与没得把痛啊没事
So then next is showing that something arising, having originated from that which is permanent, and its being impermanent is contradictory, and that's given in verse 2:11. How can that which is produced by a permanent thing be impermanent? Never are the two, cause and effect, seen to have incongruent characteristics. So here, how can functional things such as sprouts be impermanent? It follows that they are not because they are produced, because of being produced by that which is permanent. This entailment follows because cause and effect are never seen to have incongruent, incompatible, you could say also incompatible characteristics, in that one is permanent and the other impermanent.
Oh yeah, that is it. 六天大把嘎巴的人下，是吧？六天大把嘎巴啦，六天大把嘎巴汤，你六天前面那就比写个痛啊，没得把单吧？我得了是这些什么多六天大把月把三节经马上为军政，这个了，他什么月别拿呢？六天大把嘎巴太了样，什么钱？他谈不切，六天的什么也别拿来，谈不切我是没得把你，切我是没得把你，看个错个主人性，看个错个主人性，错个就嘛一天呐，你天天那时去那时候大把没人不哦，谁干了他？看个是切着把给，就是对的，这就没路西，就是对的，大把人把的，我就来就姑娘来带呢，你也拉进去，我再做把它，再做不行，你做不行，你就几天说做把了带呢，你就几天在他结巴人是呢，他结巴了是吧？我当天没得的是，没得的，六天天呢，就是六天就是天呢，十多当没对了说话天呢，严了做了，你当你他们家去天把这当你他们家去天了呢，六天当你他们家去天了呢，碰着给我吃。碰着给我是个马的，是当你他们这个在那碰着吃着着的是个马的，是吃个是天呢，吃个是个是天了呢，个是马这把人呢，你吃不吃的就了，马这不吃就没就喂，你昨天前面吃出他会见我的，是，刚是吃出他会吃个的，是，刚是等到的，就是说看个吃个就人性，吃个。就没，说个就嘛一天呐，是我这这样，这是哪是？昨天看个说个养老进去做人性是说个养老进去做人性，说个就嘛也没吃的，天呐，昨天呢，钱那做这样的去哪？去那里，我倒把没得说，谁呀？那就知道。
So the next is showing a refutation or rejection of the idea that particles of matter are permanent, physical particles, and this has multiple subdivisions. The actual rejection of permanent physical permanent particles. And first of these has multiple subdivisions. Again, that it's unacceptable or undemonstrable to say that something that possesses parts can be a permanent thing. And then, so that's the first topic, and the rest of these subdivisions of this will come as we go along. So first, showing that one cannot establish that something that possesses parts is a permanent thing. And here, this is a rejection of an assertion by the Vaisheshika school of non-Buddhist school of philosophy, which says that permanent particles of the four elements, earth, water, fire, wind, and these are then activated by the force of karma. Out of the force of karma, they form the substantial entity of a composite meaning a conglomeration of atoms or particles to produce like a molecule or something larger that's composed of multiple particles of the basic elements of matter, which are earth, water, fire, and wind. So these composites are formed out of the force of karma to produce something that is substantially existent, they claim, producing the environmental world and so forth. So the entire physical world comes out of that. And the reply to that is incorrect, for it follows that when particles coalesce and form a composite, an increase in size is impossible if there is total interpenetration, meaning if one particle completely interpenetrates with another particle, that is, it occupies the same locus in space, then the increase in the size of the conglomerate is impossible. They couldn't, collectively couldn't come to cover any space. They wouldn't be able to take up any additional space. If only some of the parts coalesce, those that do are causes, while those that do not would not be causes of this production of the composite, which is a grosser object than that of the individual particles. So then the verse here shows the reply to that. That of which some sides are causes while other sides are not is therefore, she gives multifarious, or has multiple, multifarious is fine, has a multitude of sort of parts to it, or has many different aspects to it. How can that which is multifarious be permanent? It therefore follows that the smallest particles have parts, because some of a smallest particle's sides are causes while others are not. Being multifarious, it follows that it cannot be a permanent functional thing because of its having diverse parts. So here showing that the idea of an irreducible particle being able to come into a kind of conglomeration with other irreducible particles and then form a gross composite which occupies space is incoherent.
Oh yeah, that kind of thing. Oh, do that. Can't go show you. Show you yana jenji do. Yana jenji do. Do yin. Show you do money be gunzen tena. Do renji cha teni cha na zo jen de jua. Do na go de chuna ni se. Ana wo to ba me ri ba de me ri gre se. Cha na zo ba jen yin be se.
So thus, the conclusion there is that if these particles are things that together combine to form something that is a multifarious, has multiple dimensions to it, multiple like a size or whatever, then it's incorrect to hold that that they are permanent things, because they themselves would necessarily have various parts.
다 되는 이유와 두된 리두체 태배 담바 제시교와 미대발의 이我当두된 두된 단지 탐제지 미조와开朗바다 가와 생이 변하네 담봉의리 유이두보 강연바 되니 되불라요미 개나 단위 근저와 두된나라 미대토 세대 다대인 바자 有东部抗营吧，今天这部看了有些，但昨天前面一百。当你他们去教养，当你他们去教养，多件特别，前面人家多件特别，但把条线解了，体验了再解脱线了，让前面人呗，当你他们去教养，多件特别，但把条线解了，体验，验了再解线了，那他他是。养老健呢准备车是养老健那么样子，昨天养老健呢准备车，昨天在这当你归车进脚啊，昨天呢了没得对的，没得太个马的是没得把踏实的，这看是，没得把踏实，当你他们这去这样车呢。当你他们这几天呢，养老健谈不到，你我说碰着空呢，空对叫的没就他先空的先把哪些钱，钱呢，你养老谈不到，你我说碰着空呢，空对没就我康熙是，一了。前些去东北东部那边在的，由于东部抗营吧在的，一了前些去东北东部那边参与经济，由于东部抗营吧，天呢，这边在养老店在了，要把忙也不提起来是，天天这部来源民是
So next comes showing how it's unacceptable to hold that something can be arise. So here then showing how it's the arising of something like the combination of these particles together by even the coming together of the particles which are of the same type coming together cannot form another substance which is the combination of those particles. That's given in the next verse, the actual explanation of that, and then there's a rejection of showing how it's contradictory will be given subsequently. So this is given in verse 213. Someone might assert, although particles interpenetrate completely because they are partless, a separate accretion of coalesced particles forms, which produces the composite. So they're falling back on that position. The reply to that is that it follows that it is not feasible for particles to interpenetrate completely when composites form. If they merge completely, there will be no gradual increase in size from the first to the second composite and so forth. And then the verse there says that. The cause which is spherical is not present in the effect. Thus, complete interpenetration of particles is not feasible. And then the continued explanation of that in the commentary is that also the causative sphere of the characteristic of, I think that, that's in here too. Although also the causative sphere with the characteristic of appearing to the mind as partless and spherical is not present in the resultant substantial entity, the composite.
Oh, yeah. 다 두대 나니 탐제지 메조와开朗把那가와니 두대 지기네 강이 대지현지네 현지 대지현지 양미대 대지 규단 제보니 본전량 방향 되마인세 대대선도다 단위 탐제도 메조와 두대 대다 단위 편준 단위 탐제도 메조와 티체 두대 지기네 임바 강인비 과사 태나세 사두다고 아니 사이도 된다고 지기네 임비 과사 사이 과사 되나 아니 메둘러서 와 현지양 메들바 티체를 두된 지기네 강에 되니 현지진 되니 현지양 메들 세체 두된당 제부양라니 두된당 두된 초바기로 제부양라建议 봉전양바 되바양 마인배 양라자 안비유라 대비 아니 가소리 양라 젠 암비유래 대화 타와 그 메장 두제 차제라 마데베 땅을 미데바 타와 손에 내버리
So next comes showing how it is that it's contradictory to the position that the opponent holds here, to hold that these particles of matter are not completely interpenetrate each other totally. And then in verse 2:14, this is given. One particle's position is not asserted as also that of another. Thus, it is not asserted that cause and effect are the same size, don't have the same dimension or size. When complete interpenetration does not occur, one particle's position will not be asserted as being that of another. So here the example would be like if you have a particle of earth and a particle of water, the two particles can't occupy the same exact location. That's impossible. Thus, since the causal particles and the resultant composite are not asserted to be equal in size, the absurd consequence that the composite is not an object of the senses is avoided. It's something, even though here we don't accept that they're irreducible particles, nevertheless we assert that composites of these particles are something that is sensible, that can be perceived. Nevertheless, since particles have parts, their consequent unfeasibility as permanent functional things remains. Here, that means that the rejection of the idea that there are these particles or atoms which are permanent functional things is unacceptable. Nevertheless, we can maintain that a combination of particles can result in composites, gross objects, which are sensible, can be understood, can be perceived through the senses.
Thus, Yanacha Mazambi, Mari Dudela, Chashameba Gabatella, Murdan, Duden Chamela, you drebi, Draw me debe, Yana Janson Bakawa, the new banana, that among the Kala Shaji Choya, Tella Shaji Chang Yolas. Kala do, Kangu do la Choyana, Kedu do them member do. See that there is Debbie Jason between Tuna and Chaji Yawati Gushi. Chadajawaka Yawati Gushis. King Arona do Charabji Chasha Metosena. King Arona do Charaji. Ding Arona do Charabji Chasha Metosena. That the Miri Batela. Kala Shaji Choyoba. Tela Shaji Chang Segra. Do then tea cho Messena, tea cho Shindu Minewa Jula. Do then tea cho Messena, tea cho Shindu do Minewa Julas. Tea cho Messena, tea cho Shindu do Minewa Julas. Shala Sovi Choyana, Kala Shaji Choyoba, Shala Sobi Choyana, and Shala Sobi Chang, Shala Sobi Chang, Yava Yoko Grace, Choyana, Shaji Chang, Yava Yoko Grace. Do Kala Shaji Choyoba Tela, Choja Shaji Chang Yogola, Tela Shaji Chang Yos, Kala do Kangudula Choyana. I can't say, Junzana go Kangi, Yana Jan Zombing Aroji Dula, Yana Jam Zombing Arova, Mazombing Arola, Zombing Aroji Dula, Choyana, T do then Chamiji, do then member Yadis. Tingaro to Choyo, Yoba Yenza, Junzan Tigi, do Chamiji, do them by, and anybody shed this. Ani Choji Taya be in a Kalan Bichiro. Choji Ginane, and you do Tamoneva Kalan Bichiro.
So next shows the contradiction of if there was such a thing as a partless particle, a particle that didn't have parts to it, then I'm sorry, I missed that. So first is the rejection of the idea that there are partless particles, that the idea here that previously the particle was partless, but subsequently it produced a composite which has directionality to it. And so here in verse 215, someone might assert the problem of having parts occurs when the resultant substantial entity is forming, but prior to that, the smallest particles do not have parts. The reply to that is incorrect. That is incorrect. If a particle has no sides, it cannot be surrounded by particles on its four sides. Whatever has an eastern side also has an eastern part. Those whose particles have sides admit that they are not partless particles, irreducible partless particles. If something has sides, a particle has sides, such as an eastern side, it definitely must have parts, since any particle with an eastern side must also have an eastern part. For that reason, any opponent who holds that particles have sides prior to the formation of a composite necessarily admits that those particles are not partless because of accepting that they are located within the 10 directions, 10, she said, boundless directions.
Oh, yeah. That's it. 所以在云南那么开朗不切入去，但你我都在前面啦，都在前面云南，你前面了有这边找我没得吧？而且，前面做嘛是前面呢，他弟弟的做呢，你有这边找我没得吧？原来就做嘛搞完呢，连起连起接不起呢，连起连起接不起呢，当我就那太大呢。看了要把马云把天天找保养就是他都在天呢有扩散这边找保养没就把他是有个扩散进来就对这个给按照找样没就把他有这边找我不赢呢有这边找我不赢呢就有的这边找我不赢呢对手机对桥联系对了找我给桥的出两把汤要去桥的按照怕要去做动画剧呢是对你来讲要去你动画剧呢太大你才的这动画剧呢是对手两把汤要去动员动员太大你前面几都看了呀，天着我在前面几都看了，都前面了看了要把马云不写是要把马云不写是的呢，看了要把马云把我呀，对对对呀。
So next comes showing how it's contradictory for a partless particle to traverse any space, to travel over any, to travel or move through any region at all. And that being the case, it's contradictory to hold that partless particles function as can come together as a composite as a result of that. So that's given in verse 216. The front takes up, the back relinquishes. Whatever does not have both of these motions is not something which moves. And it follows that such particles, that is, if particles were partless, would not move from place to place, from one place to another. When a thing moves from one place to another, its front takes up a position ahead, while its rear relinquishes the position behind it, the rearward position. But partless particles neither take up nor relinquish a position. If it is asserted that they do not move, it is contradictory for partless particles to form the substantial entity of a composite. Thus, we haven't done that yet.
Oh yeah. 人家都在前面演了进去再做把搞啊，搞了是都在前面把，俺那演了进去再做把搞了，但呢，都在顶住那把他们这都开了我没下火，是吧？前面做把没的，都在做把影响，都在前面做把没，前面人那做把没把太有就是啊。
So thus, it's contradictory for partless particles to form the substantial entity of a composite. Thus, real particles should never be accepted. Here, we say that we assert that particles form composites. They make up composite things. However, we reject the idea that these particles are partless. They have no parts.
인다 두된 사바기 라바 투바 여장 두된 참매 사바기 라바 투바 메시 라바
So we say that it's the collection of particles which makes up a gross physical object, but we would not accept that it's a collection of partless particles that collectively make a gross physical object.
네, 가서 다야 요소. 나도대 처음에 나줘비세요 통화 미래발이我打把月呗，昨天大把月吧，大把搞把我，他不我才啦。看了他不原名是看起来就原名呐，看了他妈呀原名呢，我每天也看个痛，是，他昨天大把，那就我那也是没给，是没给汤圆越多些呐。是吧？对天打吧，对天打吧，真的，那就我看给通话太没，俺这通话太个嘛的，是吧？没听，俺是太个嘛的，如果看了，他不对起下药吧？我看了他不原没信，如果看了呀，他不对起下药吧？没信。如果看起来呀，俺呢，我们几个吧样没啦。如果看了呀，他们接起车要吧样没呗，没要吧接起车要吧没呗，首先听你。前面给带着吧，现在为首先听你希望看了呀，我都没写是，我都没写的，希望看个样，我什么的，我的钱就给买的是，
So next comes the rejection of the idea that here showing that it's not demonstrable. One can't hold that that partless particles are seen by the awareness of a yogi or yogini, someone who's engaged in the practice of yoga. Through that, they're able to see partless particles. There's the actual rejection of that, and then the next topic will come later. First, showing the actual rejection of that. Someone might say, well, permanent particles exist because they're seen by the divine eye, clairvoyance of yogis. And then the response to that is given. Where's this 270? Permanent particles do exist because she has adepts, yogis, yoginis, perceive them by virtue of the divine eye or divine clairvoyance. Answer, the reply to that: what adepts, what yogi or yogini sees such a permanent particle? That which does not have a front nor any middle and which does not have a rear, being invisible, who will see it? Seeing it is not feasible because such a form she has here, or physical thing, a particle which firstly has no front nor any middle, and finally does not have a rear portion, is not evident, is not perceptible to any kind of perception. So a thing that it doesn't have a front, back, or middle is not something which is perceptible. It couldn't be perceived.
Oh yeah, that thing is, then you were rabbi, you bet, do that, you were devil Gabanese. Debu in the Gushiba, Tena Juni Tamayin. Yana Kana Juya, but Tena Debu Yamayin, that do them mena. And then do this up a Rabba Jumebe, member Jues, Rabba Jumeba Jue, and Rabba Yola, Tea Taba City. Oh, Yina, I need you to meet them Bichero. Yina, oh, Yina, you don't meet them Bichero. Sena, I need a castle. Do that in the Taba Main Bata, I said, and then I junior down my insect in better. Taba Mimbata, you could give one. You could give one, Sabina, Juicy, 사변 아니 사변 각세 마 사변 나바 주나 누구 저거 와 이다 누구 제와나 사변나 주신 지 사변 지바티 신도 제부 양라다 제 제부 양라제 제와 이니 두두된 시바 대리세레서 두된데 시바 대리세레서 두아 좋아 싶어서 두된데 시바 대리세레서 두된 시바 두장 개와스나 가봐 마주데 유랑신 미동신 저우 대신 계도 세나 야
So next comes rejection of the position which holds that because there are gross things, there necessarily have to be permanent particles that are the source of these gross objects. And this is given in verse 218. Here someone asserts, since coarse things, gross things would have no causes if particles did not exist, particles do exist, and moreover are permanent because they are causeless functional things. This is the objector's position. They exist as functional things and they don't possess causes. They have no causes. So someone who might say that, the reply to that is the effect destroys the cause, therefore the cause is not permanent. And then the expansion on that reply is that it follows that causal particles are not permanent, for just as a seed changes and disintegrates when the sprout is produced, the causal particles, the things that make up the seed, are destroyed by the production of the resultant composite. So in both cases, the cause disintegrates when the effect arises.
如果叫我呢，这边呢就行，就把新都这不原了，见结吧原了见结吧云天体就都在西巴就把提起了，是呢，他的就把的马主的，就让些没东西，这不天线阶段是决定，就让些马东啊没就把这不天线阶段先呐。现在养了有康呢，就都这要把天呐，这个养了这要把马银白去，有康呢就都这要把天呐，你这个养了这要把马银呢，有所说的那位碰那么心头。碰把他那不心头，推那么有所说那位，推那么有所说那位，那位。안에 규제 많이 받아도 규제 많이 받 퇴년 봐 퇴년도 있어서 내가 안에 규제 많이 받아도 그랬어.
So then the objector would say that reasoning that you've given is not established, for they produce a separate effect without giving up their identity as causes, their causal identity. And then the reply to that is, the answer to that is alternatively, or here replying to the second objection, where the cause exists, the effect does not. Here, since the presence of the causal particles in a place precludes that of the resultant composite, it follows that they are not cause and effect. That is, the causal particles and the composite are not cause and effect because they would be simultaneous and occupy the individual positions like a pot and a woolen cloth in their respective places. So a pot and a woolen cloth being simultaneous, they have their own specific locations, and cause and effect, the individual particles and the composite would be simultaneous and occupy separate individual positions.
Oh yeah. 대체 가나 양나 가나 주여 봐 테나 저부 요마 인세데 제라와 다 두전 따바 요바 산제기 마수비 준전이 통장고 따바니 강도 나와 마인데 테나 나면 산제남 두전 따바 임미송 세 준전 대장 두전 따바 마인데 세요 준전 대장 두전 따바 마인데 누라 누시안남 단위 탐지지 주바 매베셀 따바이나 누라 아니 누시안나 단위 탐지지 주바 요거레세 아니 준전대장 두전 따바 마인데 누라 시안 누라 누시안나 단위 탐지지 주바 매베셀 누 토제 인라 토제라 따바 미리소 뒤남면 산재지 뒤남면 산재남 도대 따바니도 예바 미스위 빈산 외대 토제용어버 통대용어버 토제용어버 통대용어버 따바니 간도야 나 마이데 마세비 주제 테니체로 오세요 대난 나야 산재나 도대 따바니 미송 세어티바다.
So next, then, for the following reasons as well, following reason 2, particles are not permanent. Particles are obstructive in that they're obstructive in that they cannot be penetrated completely by other particles. That which is obstructive cannot be permanent. And the verse here lays that out. A permanent thing that is obstructive is not seen anywhere. Therefore, the Buddhas never say that particles are permanent. The reason why the Buddhas never say that permanent particles exist is because Buddhas do not perceive obstructive permanent things.
Oh yeah, teacher also. 나한테 가서 센서바 간다. 전담주지 리바 주내서 누전 고바 체신. 세대다 가는 센서바기 누전 참여 고베 리바데라 주기 주자고 나 차라 두자니도 주. 아니 주보 다자 고제나 공부연도 전담도 주로 세가라. 아니 유도 참모지라 소지 두지 고와지나 아니 유도 되게라 대 가소래 샤둘라 리비차 샤라 리비차 여담매 야 어쩔거이가라 가세 여담매 샤라 리비차 유도 샤라 리비차 차되게 아니 안 누라레다 말이 샤라 리비차 차디 누라레 말이 나네 아니 유도 참모대 차자수 타와 유도 참모대 그 샬라레비 차디 누블라레나 샤누고 돈이 고사치도 타위다 끼었던 거라 주기 직접 고와나 하스가나 아니 유도 참모대라 도 주기 직접 고와나 아니 어디를 다 가서래 샬라레비 차디 누블라레를 저저나 아니 샤누고 돈이 어디 제베 아니 공부 도전점들 좋아다 데리고 다 뛰어다가러 와 주거 제자 차를 주보다 화사지기나 아니 공부 좋아겠자 공부 좋아 뛰어다가러 다 되게 된다는 순구에 살에서는 선상바 간데 전단 지위를 봐 주의 도전 고바 체진 도전 참여 고바 체진 위도 참모지라 아니 가서 샤라 유지 도제 샤라 리비 차지 누람바레나 도전 차제스 주 유도 참모지 샤라 리비 차나데 누라레나 아니 샤누고 돈이 과사 대와 예자 아니 도전 참모지야 공부점도 교육 된다 다네
So now then, here it says Yogacharans, Chittamatrans, those proponents of mind only, they employ reasoning which is investigating the ultimate nature of things, and when they do that, they reject the idea of irreducible particles. The way they do that is by proposing, well, first of all, there's the observation of gross objects which are extended in space. But when we analyze a gross object which is extended in a physical object which is extended in space, we can reduce it further down to particles. Now, these particles, if they're completely irreducible, we have to imagine a condition where we take 6 of these supposedly irreducible particles and we arrange them with one particle in the center. One in the center, 4 in each of the directions, and then one above and one below. Is that 7? 7. 1, 5, 6, 7. 7 particles. So if we have 7 of these supposedly irreducible particles arranged with 1 in the center, 1 in the east, 1 in the west, 1 in the north, 1 in the south, 1 above, 1 below, and like that. If these particles are actually irreducible, then one has to pose the question, well, do they have any directionality? That is, the particles particle that's on the east side, does it have a western face to it that would enable it to come into contact with the particle in the middle? And then the particle on the west side, does it have an eastern face to it that would allow it to also come into contact with the particle in the middle? And in that way, all of these various particles, if they necessarily have to have some directionality in order to come together with other particles, the particle in the center in this case, so as to form a gross extended object, which is a composite of the individual particles. And you know, from that, one can go from say like to form molecules and then larger, more extended particle composites of material things, so as to form eventually these extended objects like tables and such. So in any case, when one does that kind of analysis, looking at the directionality of these supposedly irreducible particles that compose the simplest forms of material extended objects, we have to come to the conclusion that if the individual particles have directionality, they have east, west, north, and south, then they necessarily have they're extended in space. They have directions, so therefore they have to be extended in space. And if they were irreducible, then one would end up with the absurd conclusion that if they don't occupy space, then the particle in the east would be in the same locus, the same position as the particle in the west. There'd be no difference between them as far as where they're located, because they're without any kind of parts or subdivisions at all. And employing that kind of analysis, then the mind-only school is able to reject the notion of irreducible particles of matter that are extended in space, and by virtue of that, that's their form of ultimate analysis, which rejects the idea that there's irreducible particles of matter.
Oh yeah, 아니 담보 잠시 두대 참여주 참여 사배 라바투 아니 참여 사배 라바라 때네 아니 라바티 시된 시에다 드린 바르 아니 다든지 가서 너도 왜 시된 샤지 시와당 아니 가 선사배 시된 샤지 메시와 그 시된 추르투도 주단데 아니 참여 사배 라바투 라바투 왔을 때 두바디 두주대다 시로 전도 주단데 말이 이라 대자 선사배 시된 참여 샤지 메시와레데 참여 샤지 와르 전다 참여 샤지 시와 두고 와르 참여开거 말이데 인자 도대 외사바기 아니 참여 사회를 봐 투자데 아니 선사바기 메도바 인자 치대 샤지 메시와 저 인자 된단디 남시 된도도开两바니 치된 거바 체진스 전담 제지 그바 되기 그바 주인의 이도다 그바 주인 간나 두장 거바 체진스 두장 거바서 두장 거바 자마이바 치된 거바 체진스 저 치된 된도도 가지 남시 된도도开两바데 안에 르바나바 탐제도 뭐 아니 르바나바 탐제도 순외스 치대연나 아니 치대면나 남시 된도야 매고 그래 남시 된도연나 아니 치대야 요고래 대신 이거도 예매 총바 다 되래 최근 나시와 니보데 대신 예매 총바 거와 이제 대신 예매 총바 거와 이제 대송 거래 남시 된도 칼 누된 거바 최신 치된 거바 최신 남시 된도도 칼람데 리바나바 탐제도 총배 시가라 대신 예매 리바나바 탐제도 총배 치대잖아 아니 남시 되면 샤고래 남시 되면 가서를 치대 미션은 남시 되면 샤고래 어 되리다 대신 예매 총바 지대나 잡아 치다 칼람와 차고 세대인바다
So now then the Yogacara school, it's a proper name for what is called the mind-only school. Yogacara says that for example, the Sautrantikas and others who assert the existence of external objects, Yogacara is applied to the Sautrantika position that there are actual external objects. This kind of analysis of physical extended things in space and say that if these physical extended things in space are composed of particles of matter, physical particles, then because the particles, individual supposedly irreducible particles, actually possess directionality in order to come together to form gross extended objects. Since we can establish that a particle that possesses extension and directionality necessarily has parts, then we can, in that kind of analysis, reject the existence of any kind of external object whatsoever. So they use that kind of analysis, showing that there's no such thing as an irreducible particle of physical particle, to establish the non-existence of external objects, and then they establish as a consequence of that things are strictly mental in nature. They don't have the externality that appears is illusory and non-existent. So then we say that the Yogacara, when they do that kind of analysis of the Sautrantika position, which asserts external objects, the Yogacara is able to reject the existence of external objects. But when they do that, they really they reject the existence of partless particles as well as external objects as a consequence. But when they after they've done that, they nevertheless assert that consciousness is real. Consciousness is irreducible and is ultimately existent and real. But that's unacceptable, because the reasoning that they employ to reject external irreducible particles of physical stuff, and the reasoning that rejects the existence of some kind of a real consciousness which is irreducible, is exactly the same. You can employ the exact same reasoning which reduces supposedly irreducible particles of physical stuff or matter to incoherence, to reduce consciousness as well to the idea of a real existing consciousness that can be reduced in the same way by the same reasoning. Therefore, in this system here, we don't accept, just as we accept that there are particles of matter, and those particles of matter, physical particles, come together to form composites that form gross extended objects that are perceptible. But we don't accept that the particles that are the building blocks of physical things are irreducible in any way. But we apply the same analysis to consciousness to show that it too is not real, existing in the way it appears as some kind of objectively established irreducible thing, but rather is reducible in the same way. It exists, but it's not real. So in that way, we conclude that we ought to accept both the external objects, external objects, and consciousness as they are generally accepted within the world.
Oh yeah. Chiro chame kaile chiro yoba medeba. Tenali lundan ribene jawe dewala sunso chele shenyen bor suana shi chene. Jidan tabe neba jawe dewala sunso sa lunda de medu de shija verande la yowa injiri. Ati chiba imbara. Chiro chame kaile chiro yoba medebe. Tenali lundan jidan tabe neba niga yoba jawe dewala sunso chene. Tali shenyen bor duga odi 디데라 남지 된도도 캐리바 나바탄에 저 ten신이가 지단 잡아 신 캐랑와 차오
So this then, we can establish this point both through scripture, reasoning and scripture both, that we accept the existence of external objects, we accept the existence of consciousness, just as they're generally acceptable within a worldly sphere, as they're accepted commonly in the world, but we don't accept the ultimate existence of these things as they're posited philosophically philosophically or by erroneous forms of worldly conceptions, mistaken ideas about them. So here, the point here is it says in this portion of the text in the Master Aryadeva's 400, as well as in Chandrakirti's explanation of that, Master Chandrakirti demonstrates here that Master Aryadeva does, and thus Master Nagarjuna as well, don't accept the existence of irreducible particles, and therefore they don't accept la gendi kasa no. So in the commentary on the 400 here by Master Chandrakirti, it shows that we necessarily have to, we must accept external objects as well as consciousness in the way that they're commonly held to exist, or generally accepted as existing within worldly usage.
Oh yeah, Satini Taba Zeru Gabala, Mava Rande Taba Zeru Gaba, Shendi, and in Dagaran Taba Gaba. That Tambolaya Gaba, Tambolaya, Goba Zeru Gabada, Yangale Devi, Insu, Nungamaliwa Bamba Shava Gawa, that Tambo Goba Zeru Gabadi. 清当清当，他们来先，他把卡的原来你，在那这样没觉得，在那在了他太大的些没觉，让人的话，那起来嘛，是吧？对嘛，这民众都马多话他哪里是？上届呢，路天大把没送我点没去，去对嘛钱那么呢？对嘛钱那么呢？大国些送呗，南天机，安尼。 托巴些有国把在住去年都不约的，是大家让嘛给，是吧？看说的，说他吧，说他看说当过的，俺那南天就托巴钱是吧？给出去这不就个话了。 给种出去这部分人，给种给出的，俺那上面拍钱买了丢过蓝电，我这俺那台了在那特别这部一张，给种出去这部是个的吧，一张，那我写上面蓝电就特别的钱，我把这住去年到不呢，也得台面那拍比单把送吧，写送吧呀，没有拍比单把送吧，俺那东岸单把根据单把我把单把是一个蓝都送吧呀，没有把就闲了。 Yeah.
So next comes a rejection of the notion that liberation is established substantially, and that has two parts to it. A rejection of the position that is held within the Buddhist philosophical schools within Buddhism, that liberation is established, substantially established, or established as a substance, and then subsequent will come rejection of the idea that liberation there's some kind of intrinsic liberation of the self, which is held by non-Buddhists. And so here the first of those has two subdivisions, showing that the idea that cessation is substantially established is unacceptable, and then showing also nirvana, the nature of nirvana. So first, showing that it's unacceptable unacceptable to hold that cessation is substantially established. This is given in verse 220. And here she says, the assertion of our own sectarians, she says, she gives a note on that, which means like the different Buddhist schools, such as the Vaibhashikas here especially. The Vaibhashikas are being singled out here particularly, who do not understand that uncreated phenomena are merely nominal, merely nominally existent. So they're saying as follows: although it is true that Buddhas do not mention permanent particles, they say that uncreated phenomena are permanent. Let's see. So although it is true that the Buddhas do not teach permanent particles, the Buddhists teach that dharmas or things, phenomena which are uncreated are permanent. And since they say that, then we would say that the cessation which comes about through the attainment of the truth of the path is established substantially similar to a dam. If that was not the case, if that didn't exist, then it would have been incorrect for the Buddha to also teach the other three noble truths. So here the point is that these cessations which come about through knowledge, which are produced in the course of the path, this is referring to once one enters into the path of unobstructed path and enters into the path of seeing, beginning with that, then one negates some portion of the mental afflictions and establishes what's called a true cessation. Those true cessations, according to the Vaibhashikas, which are the result of this, result of knowledge that's attained through the path, those are substantially existent according to the Vaibhashikas. And they would say if true cessation is not substantially existent, is merely nominally existent, then that would entail that it would have been incorrect for the Buddha to teach the other three noble truths as well. We'll stop there for now.
Asanje Shindo Mede Boy, Togananda Shin Ajeva, Guru Rana Mandala Bani, Amida Tisha Tasha.